going to depend on your negotiating leverage and on the market. Like any other seller concession, if you want the seller to contribute to your buyer agent commission as a buyer, you can ask for it. They can say yes, they can say no. Okay. I think that's where we're going ultimately. I think that's where we're going to land as an industry. Welcome, folks. For the people jumping in live, thanks for jumping in. For the folks watching it later on the replay, on YouTube, wherever it is, thanks for tuning in. I wanted to have this info session for a while now. I've been collecting information. Please check out some of the resources below. I'm going to be posting this in the comments and in the newsletter of the different videos I've done over the last, 60, 90 days on this topic of, the NAR settlement, because I think it's one of those watershed moments of the industry. However, I will say, and by the way, for the folks watching live, you get a bonus. Drop any comments, any questions you've got, anything you want to hear me talk about. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. So if there's anything you want me to touch on, because I want to go broad. This might go 30, 40 minutes. So, you can catch it on the replay if you have to go. But I really want to go deep on this topic. It's one of those watershed moments, but I'm not going to go down the dooming path, guys. I see too many agents just freaking the F out, right? Just freaking out over some of these changes, being very pessimistic, a lot of self-loathing coming out. I mean, there's a whole thing about how agents are reacting to some of these changes in the settlement. I think it's really telling. A lot of the people that are optimistic and positive are being optimistic and positive. A lot of the people that don't like change and feel it's a very unfair are kind of stuck on that, in a big way. They're stuck on that with this settlement. And I think that's kind of a big deal. But today, I want to give you my recommendation, my tips, the latest and greatest information I have on what I would be doing if I were adapting to these changes right now, what some of my most successful clients are doing, what some of the most successful agents in the industry are doing to adapt to this new reality. It's a new reality. For those of you that have been under a rock, have no idea what I'm talking about. Folks, a few years ago, there was a lawsuit filed in federal court against the National Association of Realtors and several of the largest brokerages, EXP, Remax, Realogy, the biggest brokerages, and the National Association of Realtors, alleging that they were, doing, that we as an industry were engaging in anti-competitive practices, basically price fixing, keeping commissions artificially high because of the way the MLS was set up. That was a novel approach. That was something that hadn't been litigated before, at least not to this extent. So it was a relatively new approach to this. And I think this lawsuit was filed back in 2018. It's been a while. It's been years. It's been years since it was filed. Okay. And the National Association of Realtors and the other companies were fighting it, right? Fighting it, trying to not get it established as a class action lawsuit, trying to get it dismissed, trying to hit all the weak points that the lawsuit had, and just trying to get people to ignore it, right? It didn't work, guys, okay? It went to trial last year. It went to trial. And right before it went to trial, we saw the first domino fall. Remax decided to settle out of court, right? They decided to settle the lawsuit and not, continue. They saw it as a losing proposition, and they agreed to change a lot of business practices for Remax agents only initially. The case went to trial in October, all right? The trial lasted a few weeks. In my opinion, the trial was a disaster for the industry. It didn't go well, right? And a lot of the things they focused on, I thought were kind of just silly. Again, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an expert in antitrust law. I just saw a lot of the evidence presented wouldn't have convinced me that there was some kind of broad conspiracy, but it convinced the jury. Okay. And more importantly, the way the case, shook out, the way it was settled, convinced the other plaintiffs, National Association of Realtors, Keller Williams, the other large brokerages, that this is not going to go our way, right? Verdict came in, you guys were found liable, right? You guys were engaging in these practices that kept commissions artificially high. That's what the judge said. That's what the jury said, okay? And the damages were in the hundreds of millions of dollars, or was it $1 billion? It was in just a ridiculous amount of money. And because it's an antitrust lawsuit, the defendant can get triple damages because of the kind of lawsuit it is, okay? The kind of law that it's involved in. So the National Association of Realtors will look at a potential fine in the billions of dollars, billions with a B, and a huge amount of potential litigation from every state, against every brokerage, every member of NAR. And at some point, they decided it wasn't worth pursuing. They weren't going to win. Some agents have come out and said, we should have taken it to the Supreme Court. There's this other decisions. NAR didn't fight for us. They just folded. I don't think any of that's true. I don't think any of it is true, right? Because they fought it for several years. NAR fought it with the best attorneys money can buy. And it was just a losing proposition, guys. They made the case and people believed it. All right. So since then, Keller Williams has settled. NAR eventually came down and settled the lawsuit in March, and they agreed to certain changes in their practices. Okay. NAR agreed to change certain practices to let commissions be more guided by the free market. They wanted to set things up so that market forces had more of an influence on real estate commissions, because they said ultimately this whole lawsuit was about the fact that they said that not enough market forces were affecting commissions. It was other factors that wasn't the market. It wasn't supply and demand. It wasn't the market. Okay. So they said, let's make these changes. And there's actually several changes, but the most important ones are, number one, buyer agency commission, like buyer broker commission, would no longer be advertised on the MLS and on any MLS affiliated site, like an IDX. It couldn't publish that. Okay. You can no longer do that. It's not available anymore. Why? Because they wanted to be decoupled. They don't want it to just be a universal offer of compensation on the MLS. It's no longer true. That's what they went against in this lawsuit. They didn't want the MLS to be a universal offer of compensation. They said that kept the free market from influencing commissions. Okay. You can disagree with that if you want, right? I don't think I agree with it either. But they said if that's true, then this is a way to decouple that, right? Take it out of that dynamic, change the dynamic, shake things up, disrupt things. No more advertising buyer agent commissions on the MLS. Number two, they were now going to require any buyer working with an agent, represented by an agent, to sign a broker agency agreement that clearly stated how much the buyer agent was going to be paid. For me, those two are the biggest changes. Everything else stems from those two big changes, major changes. What's the intention here? The intention is to not have buyer agent compensation be solely negotiated with the seller. Nope. They want the buyer to negotiate it with their agent. They want the buyer and seller to negotiate it among themselves. They don't want it to be standard. They don't want it to be a fixed amount, predetermined amount. They don't want it to be a predetermined amount. That's important, okay? I'm going to bring that up again because I think that's where this is all going ultimately. I think ultimately we're going to be in a world where listing agent compensation and buyer agent compensation are completely separate items. They're not, because right now that's different. It's different. Right now they're negotiated at the same time. A lot of times the seller says, I want to pay this much to the listing agent, and I want the listing agent to share this much with the buyer agent. This agreement, this settlement wants to destroy that. Okay. They don't want that anymore. That's become clear to me now. It wasn't clear to us before a few months ago, to be really, again, this is back in March, not that long ago. Back in March, back in April, myself, and a lot of industry, members kind of thought that we weren't going to advertise a buyer agency commission in the MLS anymore, but you could just call and ask. What are you offering for buyer agency commission? Okay, thanks, bye. We could just ask, call and ask. I no longer think that's going to be the final solution. I thought that was going to be it. It's again, we have the same system, a slightly tweaked, slightly different. Who cares, right? I think it's going to change more than that. I think now, and eXp Realty kind of put this out more explicitly. They said they want to decouple the commissions, right? They're no longer allowing that to be in the listing agreement. It's now a separate document. I think that's what we're going to get into. I think that's where we're headed. where the seller negotiates how much this listing agent's going to make, and the buyer should negotiate how much the buyer agent's going to make. And then if you want a concession from the seller, it's the same as any other concession. It's the same as any other concession you're going to get from the seller, right? It's going to depend on your negotiating leverage and on the market, like any other seller concession. If you want the seller to contribute to your buyer agent commission as a buyer, you can ask for it. They can say yes, they can say no. Okay. I think that's where we're going ultimately. I think that's where we're going to land as an industry. I think that's where we're going to land as an industry on this topic. Right now, things are in flux, guys. Right now, there's a lot of questions and there's not a ton of clarity on this. Here are my recommendations for you guys. All right. Number one, I'm going to approach this first as a buyer agent. Okay. As a buyer agent, when you first contact a buyer, and you're probably already received training on this in your local association, in your state realtor association, I'm sure. But I'm going to summarize what I've seen across the country. When you first come in contact with a potential buyer, you should have that conversation. You should have a buyer consultation. You should have a formal buyer consultation where you tell them what you do for them, right? And if you've heard my content and my recommendations, it should always be about your value proposition. And you should have a really good one as a buyer. And this is especially true if you're prospecting or if you're generating internet leads. Because if you're generating those kinds of leads, you need a really strong value prop. Otherwise, you're never going to convince them to work with you. But this is now, you should do this across the board no matter what. You should have a strong value proposition because you are the area expert, because you have access to off-market properties, because you've got your VIP buyer program, because you can give them access to these different loan programs that you know how they work, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You should have that value proposition as clear as day. I bring to the table this, and this. Finding the home is just one of the things I help you do. Okay. You can actually do that on your own a lot of times. You don't need a ton of help from an agent to find a great property unless it's off the market. Then I'm bringing you the property you otherwise wouldn't have seen, right? So you should have a really crisp, really clear value proposition. When I go in and I negotiate deals with builders, with sellers, with agents, I, on average, save my clients $5, $10, $15, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 or more, right? On average, this is how much money they save by working with me. You got to be that clear with your value proposition. Here are some testimonials from people that have worked with me, and this is how happy they are. Your value prop should be that clear, okay? That precise. It shouldn't be, I'm an awesome agent. I've sold these many homes. I have these many certifications. I have these many awards. What does that have to do with me as a buyer? Put yourself in their shoes. That's awesome that you're a very decorated agent. How does that help me exactly, right? How does that help me? What's in it for me? You got to answer that question very clearly. When I was an agent, active agent in Seattle, one of my value proposition was I was an immigrant to the US as an engineer, and that was my client base, immigrant engineers in the US. For a lot of them, I literally spoke their language because I came from Mexico, right? I knew the process of moving to the US. I knew the issues. I knew the visas. I knew the loan restrictions. It was hard to get a loan sometimes for folks. I knew all of those things inside out. I knew the best lenders. I knew the bad lenders. I knew the situations they'd run into. I knew the tax implications. Well, I didn't give them tax advice, but I knew a lot of the tax implications for some of these folks because I had gone through it. I was one of them, right? And I understood them. I came from that industry. I could connect with them on that level. That was my unique value proposition, right? I know how your head works. I can work with you at that speed. Whoa, right? And I've got these home runs that I've hit for my clients. I want to do something like that for you. Great, that's awesome. You got to have a really crisp value proposition. And at the end of that presentation, I don't think you start here, but you should end here. There's this agreement that formalizes our relationship, right? And by the way, this is now required. So you know what? I welcome it. There's been some changes in the industry. I don't know if you've heard of that. There's a lot more transparency now. I love that because we win nothing if we are against these changes in the eyes of the consumer. There's nothing to gain by being against these changes in the eyes of the consumer. There's a lot of changes coming, right? And one of the things that I like about these changes is the increased transparency. All right. There's a lot of misinformation going out about this and that. Here's what it really means. We have to sign a contract now, which I think is great. Or maybe you already did. We're continuing to use these contracts and they're now mandatory. I've always used them. And it outlines everything that I'm supposed to do. And it outlines everything you're supposed to do. Okay. One of those things is how I'm getting paid as an expert, okay, as your consultant, as your advisor. I expect to be paid the equivalent of 3%, using that as an example, FTC, that there's no such thing as a standard commission, but let's use that as an example. This is actually from the trial, which I think is insane. But I want to get paid. I expect to be paid 3%. I'm going to do my darndest to get the seller to cover that, right? Because, parenthesis here, in every country on the planet, the seller pays commissions, by the way. And not just in the US and Canada. In every other country, the seller is expected to pay the commissions on the sale. But, I digress. I'm going to try my best to get the seller to cover these as is customary, like that's normal. But in case they don't cover it completely, right, I want you to be able to come to the table and cover the difference. Does that work for you? And you can go down to the detail how you would make that work. How you can even change the price of the property, right? As long as it appraises, you can change the price of the property. You can ask for more concessions, etc. Okay, etc. You want it to include, and that's how that would work. Are you okay with that? Great. And you can even tell them, I'm going to talk. I'm going to know ahead of time if they're even willing to entertain an offer like that. So you know ahead of time what you're getting into. You don't have to agree to anything you don't want to pay for. Okay. You can cancel this agreement at any time. If you feel this is no longer a great relationship and we're not going to help you find the dream home, right? The home of your dreams. Is that fair? Great. Sign and we'll get started. Guys, it is as simple as that. Getting them to sign on the agreement should be the next logical step, okay? It's the obvious next step if you've done your job on establishing your value. Okay. That's why people talk about value proposition. It's like, what's in it for them for working with you? And a little bit of a tangent here too. I feel, this might be wrong, but I feel that a lot of the anxiety coming from agents that are freaking out over some of these changes is that they're really struggling with that value proposition. They've never had to think about it before. They've never had to enunciate it that clearly before. Not all agents. The best ones have been doing this forever because you're not going to get an internet lead to work with you if you don't impress them, if you don't have great value. So a lot of the top agents, I don't think care about these changes. I'll be really honest with you. They are not that worried about it. They're training their people and they are preparing to take market share from the agents that don't prepare, the agents that freak out, the agents that leave the industry. I have seen this last 30 days. People have started freaking out this month because this is the deadline to implement the changes. Deadline Saturday. Okay. I have seen so many agents saying they're leaving the industry because of these changes. I'm like, the changes haven't even been implemented yet. You're already leaving the industry. I have a feeling you weren't selling any homes and you found something to blame, right? That's my thought. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think a lot of the negativity, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the fear is coming from an agent. The fact they haven't had to be clear on their value proposition, right? It's a lot of self-doubt, a lack of self-confidence. They're like, I don't think I should get paid that amount. I think that's really it. To be very honest with you, I think that's really it. They're finding it difficult to justify that they should get paid no matter what, okay? They don't feel comfortable with that. And I think those folks are really going to struggle with these changes, those folks. The agents that have no doubt about it that they should make their money, I think are going to thrive with these changes, okay? They were probably thriving before and they're probably going to thrive afterwards, okay? It's that messy middle that can really struggle a lot with these kinds of changes. That's why you should train, prepare yourself, get ready. If you're watching this video, you're getting ready. Kudos to you, okay? So you should finish strong on that buyer consultation, get them to sign, and go from there, guys. Go from there. And there's a lot of other cases where you have to sign agreements. If you're at an open house and they want to go and see more properties, if you're meeting with an internet lead and they want to see one property, there's a lot. I mean, some associations have single showing agreements. They've got time limited agreements. Zillow has like a 1 week agreement, with no compensation in it. I don't love that. There's a lot of other variants. Okay, I'm going with the hardest one, the most comprehensive one, which is the buyer agency agreement that covers compensation and has an open-ended duration, right? Until you want to cancel. And there's a time limit, that's fine too. No problem. A month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, right? Put it in there. And they can, as long as they can cancel at any time, who cares? Okay? Who cares what the term is? Okay, great. So that's my recommendation on the buyer consultation. Also for buyer agents. Also, so this is a hazardous part of the process. When you're in the you have a signed buyer, you have an agreed upon compensation amount, an agreed upon amount, okay? And you've got that in there. You're out looking at properties. One thing, and this is becoming unbelievably clear, guys. One thing we should not do is call around and ask people what are you offering for buyer agent commission, and then discard people where we don't like the answer to that question. We should not do that. Okay, that's called steering. And I've seen a lot of agents threatening to do that. A lot of agents boasting about how they're going to do that. Guys, you don't know what you're talking about. Talk to your broker. Talk to the council at your association of realtors, your local association. Get clarity on that, because I think you cannot do that. And that's not a desirable. It's a violation of the settlement, number one. And you might be in violation of more than just that. That's my opinion, okay? So because the commission should have no effect on what the buyer wants and what they're going to get. I don't think it should, honestly, right? What you should do is inform yourself if any of these properties are offering a buyer agency commission, because you're going to find, and this is going to, my prediction is this is going to be more and more common because of the changes like EXP did. There's going to be more and more common where more and more listings don't offer a buyer agency commission. But that's not a reason to freak out. That's not a reason to believe they're not going to pay one, okay? Just because there's going to be a handful of listings, which I think will increase over time, they're not offering a buyer agency commission, does not mean they're not going to offer one. They wouldn't pay one. I don't think it's going to mean they're not going to pay one, okay? I'll get into more of that. But if you call around and ask, or you text them and ask, and they tell you, one of the biggest things you got to be cognizant of is that's just information you should present to your buyer and let them know. This is the number you want, end of discussion. Perfect. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. If it's less than what you want, you can tell them, hey, I'm going to ask for more. I got you, right? I'm not satisfied with this. We're going to ask for more. But if in case they say no, you might have to cover the difference. Just to be clear, you want to proceed or not? I think check with your association, your broker, that's the proper way to proceed with transparency, with clarity, okay? I'm going to ask for more, but in case they say no or it's less, you're going to come up with a difference. Is that clear? Great. I love it. Let's go. It's best foot forward, okay? And if they're offering zero compensation, same answer. I'm going to ask for them to cover it. I'm going to put it in the offer. I'm going to go for it, guys. You have to get into the habit of asking for it if they're offering zero. If they're offering zero, it doesn't mean they will pay zero. We got to get that into our heads, because a lot of people want the new world to operate the same as the old world. They want to know the compensation up front. They want to know the fixed fee they're going to get if they sell that property. Those days are gone, guys. And the intention of the settlement, and not just a settlement, actually, I think behind this settlement, and I've had some really smart people here in the group agree with me on that, is the Department of Justice, okay? Federal government, not just this is a civil suit. This is a civil matter between two private parties that became this huge settlement, okay? Behind it, supporting it, is the Department of Justice, U.S. federal government. And I think they're not done enforcing this action. I think we're going to come up with some consent decree, some guidelines, some rules where this is going to become more formal. So get used to it. Get ahead of it. Do it the right way. Learn it the best way. If someone is offering zero commission, doesn't mean they're not going to pay a commission. Ask for it. Roll it into the offer. Gauge the listing agent. Hey, I see you guys are not offering any buyer compensation. I'm putting into the offer. I'm going to ask for it I'm going to ask for some concessions, right? Because my buyer's got to cover that. He doesn't have any cash to cover that. Again, you're a fiduciary to the buyer. Okay. Hey, we're going to ask for some money because he can't make me whole, and I want to get paid. You agree on that? Great. I'm going to put it into the offer, and I'm going to request this much in concessions up front. Would the seller be open to that? And the smart listing agents are going to say, put it in the offer. Let's see what they say. Put it in the offer. Because if they're a fiduciary to the seller, they're not going to say yes. Okay. And we should also be prepared for that. They are under no obligation. This is the new world. This is the new way of doing things. They are under no obligation to pre-negotiate and say, yeah, they'll agree to that. They're under no obligation to do that. And they probably shouldn't do that. Some might do it. But why would they predetermine a concession ahead of time? It doesn't make any sense. When you put it that way, it doesn't make any sense. When we're advertising the buyer agency commission, okay, sure. In a world of universal compensation, universal offer compensation, that world is gone. It's now a concession. Why would you advertise a concession ahead of time? It makes no sense, guys. Okay. That's the world I think we're headed in. And I think the MLSs that are trying to sneak in these concession fields and to put the concession amount up front, 1%, 2%, 3%, 0%, are just shooting themselves in the foot. We'll see if I'm wrong on that. If I'm wrong on that, by the end of the year, I'll come out and own it. I will. I don't think it's going to work. I think we're going to a world. And by the way, another important point, commercial real estate has worked this way forever. Since forever, guys. Since forever. Commercial, if a buyer is represented by an agent in commercial real estate, there is no buyer agency agreement. There's no universal offer compensation in commercial real estate. There isn't. Okay. If the buyer agent wants to get paid, they've got to work it into the deal. And everyone understands that, and everyone is okay with that. Because if you bring a buyer to one of those deals, that's worth a lot of money to a lot of people. People will pay, the seller will pay for a qualified, bona fide buyer and offer. Okay. That's why I think ultimately the agents that adapt and understand this new way of doing things are going to do fine, guys. I think they're going to do fine. I think sellers in the US understand that they need to pay to get their home sold. They have to pay a commission. And that commission is influenced by the market. Supply and demand. If you've got 35 offers, you might be inclined to pay less. I think that is going to be true. And that's never been true before, at least to the extent that we know, right? I don't think it's been as true as ever before now. And there's a lot of pressure on buyers to bring that fee down, to be more competitive. I think you're going to see that, right? And that might cause a lot of awkward and uncomfortable conversations with some of your buyers, especially on the lower end of the price spectrum. You might, and you got to be prepared for that. Okay, but go into it transparently. Go into it, eyes open. Don't shy away from these conversations. Be upfront about that, because if they're going to work with you, you're going to get paid. If they can't pay you, or even worse, if they're unwilling to pay you, thank them for their time and move on, right? A lot of agents are concerned. Buyers are just going to bypass them and go to work directly with the listing agent. Woohoo, guys. I don't know how many listing agents you know, but it is not a fantasy of theirs to have to talk to 15 unrepresented buyers for one listing, okay? And sign agreements with 15 unrepresented buyers, or declare, dual agency with 15 unrepresented buyers. That is not a good situation for the listing agent. They don't want that, actually. They don't want that liability. They don't want all that extra work, because most of them are going to lose that bidding war, okay? People just assuming that all the buyers are going to bypass the buyer's agent and move to the listing agent, I think are really overestimating the willingness of the buyer to just be represented by the seller's agent, right? Once they understand that that's the case, you should be telling, if people ask you this, you should tell buyers, why don't I just go to the listing agent? You tell them, Mr. Buyer, that's a great question to ask. You're going to be represented either way. You're either going to get represented by the seller's agent, or you're going to bring your own representation? I'll ask you a question. I got this from Fred said. He said, if you were having $1 million lawsuit against someone, because this is a battle sometimes, right? If you were doing $1 million deal and the other side had their attorney, would you use their attorney or would you bring your own attorney to that deal? If $1 million were at stake, would you have your own representation or would you rely on theirs? I'm just curious about that. Great. Then why wouldn't you bring your own representation to a real estate transaction? Doesn't make a lot of sense. If things go sideways, you don't want to be represented by someone that has an inherent conflict of interest, a fundamental conflict of interest that they know the seller, they understand the property, and you're the buyer coming up last minute, and you expect them to give you a fair shake and represent both sides equally. It's not how it works. That's not how dual agency works either, by the way, right? A dual agent represents nobody anymore because of that inherent conflict of interest. Anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but hopefully this is making sense for you guys. If the seller's not offering a commission, work it in there. Talk to them, communicate, negotiate. I think that's one of the biggest intentions of the settlement as well, because just the fact that you have to ask might change the amount. Okay. I think that's where this is really going. I'll give you an example. I posted this in the group a few weeks ago. Listing agent said they encountered a seller that was educated on the settlement and said, I don't want to offer a buyer agent commission. And the listing agent said, I really don't recommend that. That change hasn't even been implemented in our MLS yet. I would literally have to put 0%. That's still a public field. They didn't care. You've got all these other homes around here that have offered a buyer agency commission if they've sold at these prices. Are you sure? I'm sure. And they listed at a 0% buyer agent commission. Okay. They received multiple offers. And some people were contacting this listing agent, poor listing agent, freaking the hell out. How could you do this? How am I going to live if I don't make any money? This is unconscionable. Like they almost call them a traitor for doing this, right? That's just not the right reaction. It's not a professional reaction. The professional agents, and there were several, contacted them and said, all right, here's my offer, and I want to be paid this much as a buyer agent commission. Okay. And you're covering that, Mr. Seller, out of this offer. What do you think? And they ended up paying a buyer agent commission to close that deal. They did, because the seller netted more money with that offer. Period. In the story. Okay. The seller wants to net more money. If they happen to be paying a buyer agent commission on top of the seller commission, who cares? No one cares. Okay. If they're making money, it works out. If the buyer can qualify for that loan, the seller gets the money that they want. Who cares the commissions that are made, right? As long as they're reasonable and they are what was agreed to, they're within the limits. Doesn't matter to them. Okay. They're not religious about paying or not paying a buyer agent commission. They're religious about making their money. If they make their number, they make their money, and that's the best offer they have on the table, they're going to pay it. They're going to pay it. I think you're going to be surprised that the amount of sellers that sell their home, close the transaction, and don't pay any commission to the buyer is going to continue to be extremely small. Extremely small. But they're going to negotiate from a different position. You know what the listing agent said at the end of the day when they closed that deal, sold that listing? The listing agent said that they were surprised at how little the buyer agents were asking for. They would have paid more. They would have paid more. Like, I want that seared in your head. Listing agent said after everything was said and done that he was surprised that the buyer agent would work for so little. He would have asked for more. And from that seller, they would have gotten it if the offer was the same, right? They were shy. They didn't want to ask for too much. They want to inconvenience their buyer, maybe, right? Remember that, folks. Remember that. I want you to remember that story. When you're negotiating and talking to a seller, putting together a deal, you got to ask for what you're worth. And as long as the seller makes their money, I don't think it's going to change things. You're going to get paid. Okay. That's why I think, because of these dynamics, that you actually have to ask for this. You have to negotiate. You got to be competent. You got to have skill. I do think we're going to see a reduction in buyer agent commission as a percentage. I think less percentage is going to be paid out because of these dynamics, which is ultimately the intention of the settlement. Okay. But that is as a macro, as a universe, we're going to see commissions go down overall. I think we will. Not as much as people expect, but I think they will go down by a little bit at least. Okay. But here's the thing. On the macro level, it's going to happen. On the micro level, as an individual, it's up to you. It is up to you and your training and your skill, okay, and your guts and your fortitude and your self-confidence, quite frankly, to ask for what you're worth. To ask for what you're worth. And for some buyer agents, I'm sure it'll be at 1% of the property value. It'll be a fixed fee, $10,000, $5,000, $20,000. Whatever it happens to be, I don't care what it is, right? But if you have a number, stick to that. Charge what you're worth. Charge what you're worth, okay? That's it, all right? That is it for my recommendations for the buyers. My recommendations for the listing agents. And that's going to be two different recommendations, okay? Number one, if this is still working, this is still allowed, you should talk to your seller about the advantages of offering a buyer agent commission, okay? Regardless if the listing agreement includes it or not. It doesn't matter, actually, okay? Tell them of the advantages of having a professional represent the other party, okay? You should have that conversation with them. How much should they pay? Whatever the market will bear. As little as the market will bear, right? There might be competition. There might be multiple offers. Or, as we're seeing a lot of markets in Florida and Texas and some parts of California, a more balanced market, you might be willing to offer more than what you would expect to get the property sold. More. You might be offering more. You might be offering a buyer agent commission. You might be offering to buy down the interest rate. You might be offering other concessions because you want to get the home sold. You want to get it sold. And this can make it more competitive, right? Have that conversation with the seller. You should have no fear around that. And if you're in a world, which I think we're going to, where this is no longer part of the listing agreement, it's nothing you can even talk about, I would prepare them for the conversation when those offers arrive. It is a concession. Don't pay too much attention to that. Focus on your net. Is your net where you need it to be? Great. Let's move on, right? Because this is the cost of doing business. Let's go for it. That's it. And I really want to stress the communication. I shared another post a few weeks ago about a text message conversation that just went sideways, right? That an agent was asking how much are you offering for your buyer agent commission, and the listing agent, seemed like a newer agent, said, my broker said not to offer anything, not even to include it in there for now, right? So, we're willing to entertain it, but it's zero. We're going to put zero on there right now. We're not offering any, but we're willing to entertain it. And the other agent took it sideways. Well, if you're not offering any, I'm not showing the property, right? My buyer, but they said they had buyer consent. My buyer doesn't want to look at it if you're not offering a commission. They wanted to know up front. They were in the old world. And they wanted to know up front, how much am I going to get paid? I want to know up front. Otherwise, I'm not even considering the property. I think that's an old world mentality. Got to be in the new world. They were giving them signals in that text message. They were giving them signals. We'll entertain it. Put it in the offer. We'll entertain it. Okay. Put it in the offer. We'll see what happens. And they were just not meeting. They were not getting through to each other. They were talking past each other. One of them was in the new world. One of them was in the old world. Okay. You got to be where the other person is. You got to bring them to the new world. Okay. You got to be clear with that. And listing agents, because a lot of the listing agents have been, well versed on this, and there's less of you, quite frankly, than the buyer agents. And a lot of you that are focusing more on listings have been doing this longer, just on average. Okay, you got to help them out. That's my biggest thing. You got to help some of these agents figure things out. Buyer agents, you got to be open to communication. You got to be open to be educated by your broker, by the other agent, by the listing. Be open to flexibility. Be flexible on these things. Be flexible. Find ways to get paid. Okay? Be flexible on it. Just because they're not offering a buyer agency commission doesn't mean they're not going to pay it. Communicate, ask, work together, all right, to come to a deal. Put a deal together. It's going to take more work now than before. That's all right. Get paid, all right? And listing agents, have empathy for some of these folks. Do it. Help them out. Help them out, all right? Folks, all right, we've been going about 40 minutes already. 40 minutes of content. This has been a great one. I think this session really brings everything together on my recommendations for buyer agents and for seller agents. And I'm going to drop some links to some other resources that I've put together over the last 60 days, 90 days, several months from this NAR settlement. Check it out. Do a crash course. Take a deep dive over this weekend. Absorb this material and be ready. You cannot complain about the game if you know the rules. If you're going to continue in this industry, you got to play by these new rules. I don't think we have a choice at this point, okay? You don't have a choice. And if you don't have a choice, you can still have control over how you react to these changes. You control your reaction. You don't control the circumstances. Let's be clear. This is being imposed on us. They didn't ask us if you wanted to do this, okay? NAR went out and negotiated the best settlement they think they could, all right? And I trust them on that. Don't hate me because I'm defending NAR. NAR has a lot of things going wrong, by the way. I'm not going to argue with you there. Made a lot of mistakes. But one mistake I don't think they made was settling this lawsuit, right? I don't think they made a mistake there. And I don't think they made a mistake in coming to terms and getting the best deal that they could. Let's be honest about that. I've spoken to enough really smart people where I believe this is the best deal they could get, okay? And I think it's favorable to agents given the circumstances. We'll see what the Department of Justice comes down with. We'll see. Pending. We'll see. But I think NAR did the best they could do in a bad situation, okay? But we have a choice to make. How we react to that. Embrace it, guys. That is your choice. Embrace the change. That is the choice that you have, all right? Because if you resist the change, if you're pessimistic about it, if you're complaining about it to yourself, to other agents online, to your clients, to the other agent you're on the deal with, I think you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're not going to get anywhere. You're going to fail with this shift, okay? It's a shift. It's a paradigm shift. An old way of doing things is changing to a new way of doing things. Not everyone will adapt. You choose whether you adapt or not. That is a choice. Be really clear. You're not a victim here. This is not happening to you. You decide whether you want to play with these new rules or you don't. And if you decide to play by the new rules, embrace them. Embrace it. Because let me tell you, a silver lining on these changes, guys. I am old enough to remember other paradigm shifts in the industry, okay? One of them, the internet, okay? The internet having listings be publicly available on the internet was a huge paradigm shift for the real estate industry. One that I think dwarfs the buyer agency changes we're seeing now. It dwarfs it 100 times, in my opinion, 100 times. Okay. People were saying the real estate industry was going to get crushed. Agents were going to become extinct because listings were publicly available on the internet. And what else do you want an agent for than finding those properties? The agents had the book, the MLS book, and they would keep it and hide it and not show anyone unless they were willing to pay a commission from the book. Okay. Once the book was public, what do you want an agent for? Well, guess what? 25 years after the internet, the listings went on the internet, or 20 plus years after the listings went on the internet, more consumers use an agent than ever before, and there are more real estate agents than ever before. Okay. So that paradigm shift, and some people left the industry over that. No doubt some did. More came in ultimately. Okay. The 2008, 2009 financial crisis. I think it was such a big shift in the market that happened so fast that that was a paradigm shift. We went from an ultra hot seller's market to an ultra hot buyer's market in the span of 18 months, 12 to 18 months, which is like, it's like speed of light in real estate terms. Okay. Very fast, very fast. Okay. It happened so fast that half of the agents in the industry left the industry during those 18 months, by the way. It was dramatic, guys. There was blood in the streets. Some agents adapted and thrived. Some of the biggest teams, the biggest companies, the biggest tech companies in real estate came through because of the tectonic shift in the industry, that huge market, violent market shift we saw. Okay. A lot of people failed, a lot of people left. More people came in afterwards. People adapted and they thrived. They found a way to thrive. In this paradigm shift, shift number 3, in my career at least, that I've been around the industry, now we're seeing another change, another paradigm shift. We're shifting from an offer of universal compensation to no offer of universal compensation, and some new rules around that. You can choose to fail. You can choose to fail to adapt. Adaptation is optional. Survival is not mandatory. But if you adapt, I also believe you can thrive. Okay? Because I think you can grow your market share. Whenever a paradigm shift happens, a lot of the old advantages that other agents had go away. We're all on the same playing field again. Okay? It's different. A lot of the old structural advantages that other people had go away. They're gone. Things that were impossible before become possible now. I'm planting a seed. Here's an idea. People will start to innovate with the compensation structure. You might have a la carte buyer agency. You might have fixed fee buyer agency. You might have a different offer, a different value proposition than you ever thought possible, okay? And the offer propositions that are successful and resonate with the consumer will be the new companies, the new teams, the new paradigms, okay? There's opportunity here. Whenever there's a paradigm shift, it opens up new opportunities. Not everyone needs new opportunities. Not everyone's going to take them. That's fine. But if you're open to that, you can thrive in an environment like this. Paradigm shifts are huge. And I got that from the great Saul Klein. I love that framing of the paradigm shift because there can be a huge opportunity when something like that happens to leap ahead of your competition, to jump ahead. I believe with this paradigm shift, the most prepared, the best trained, the best rehearsed agents, the best polished agents that understand these changes are not, their head is not filled with misinformation, disinformation, that understand them and can clearly explain them to the consumer and find a way to get paid, I think they're going to thrive in this environment. They're going to thrive. Okay? You decide if you're one of those agents or not. All right? Awesome, folks. If you guys have any questions, drop them here in the comments. Thank you so much for jumping in and joining us on this one. This is like a master class. I love this. It was a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody.